The call came on a Tuesday morning in early November, and I remember standing at my kitchen counter with a half-eaten piece of rye toast going cold in my hand. My daughter-in-law's voice was pleasant. That was the thing. Perfectly, carefully pleasant. "We've been talking," she said, "and we just think it would be easier for everyone if Thanksgiving this year was kept small. Just us and the kids. You understand, don't you?" I said I did. I said, of course. I said whatever words a 63-year-old woman says when she is being told, very politely, that she is not wanted at her own son's table. After I hung up, I stood there for a long time. The toast got completely cold. Outside, the birch trees in my backyard had already lost most of their leaves, and the yard looked the way I felt, stripped down, waiting for something, not sure what. My name is Joanna. I live in a small city in Ontario, about 40 minutes outside of Ottawa, in the house where I raised my son and spent 31 years of my life. My husband Gerald passed away 4 years ago. A stroke, very sudden, on a March morning when the snow was still thick on the ground, and we had plans to drive to Perth that weekend for an antique fair. He never made it to the car. After Gerald died, I did what I had always done. I kept moving. I had my work. I'm a retired pharmacist. I spent 30 years at a small independent pharmacy that Gerald and I had built together from nothing, a little storefront on Bridge Street that smelled like floor wax and paper bags. When we sold it to a chain 6 years before Gerald died, I stayed on as a consultant. After he passed, that consulting work became the thing that kept me sane. But what kept me more than sane, what kept me actually alive in the way that matters, was the project. I should explain. My mother-in-law, Vera, had been a herbalist, not a casual one. She had notebooks, dozens of them, small brown-covered things she'd filled in her careful handwriting over 50 years, documenting plant compounds, traditional preparations, dosages she had tested on herself and willing neighbours in the small Cape Breton community where she grew up. When she died, she left everything to Gerald. When Gerald died, he left everything to me. The notebooks sat in a cedar chest in my spare room for 2 years. I couldn't open the chest. It felt too much like opening something I wasn't ready to open. Then one February night, unable to sleep, I finally lifted the lid. What I found changed the direction of my life. Vera had been working, in her unscientific but deeply methodical way, on something extraordinary. A compound derived from a specific combination of Eastern Canadian plant extracts, things like Labrador tea and balsam fir resin and certain lichen varieties, that she believed had powerful anti-inflammatory properties. She had notes on rheumatoid arthritis patients, on Crohn's, on chronic pain conditions that pharmaceutical treatments had barely touched. I am a pharmacist. I know how to read this kind of data, even when it is written in a 70-year-old woman's handwriting in a notebook that smells like cedar and thyme. And what I read made the hair on my arms stand up. I spent the next 2 years doing what I knew how to do. I consulted. I researched. I called a former colleague at the University of Waterloo who had spent his career in natural compound pharmacology. I drove to Halifax twice to access archives. I refined various formulations using current understanding of bioavailability and dosage. I ran informal trials with 6 chronic pain patients who'd been referred to me through my old consulting network, all of them people who'd tried everything else. The results were not conclusive. They were not published. They were the work of a retired pharmacist with a cedar chest full of notebooks and a bone-deep need to do something useful with the years she had left. But they were remarkable, and I had documented everything. Every trial, every dosage, every outcome, every refinement I had made to Vera's original formulations. All of it sitting in a fireproof filing cabinet in my spare room next to the cedar chest. My son's name is Kevin. He is 38 years old, and I love him with the specific aching love that mothers have for children who grew up kind and somewhere along the way became someone you no longer quite recognize. Kevin had been in pharmaceutical sales for 11 years. He was good at it, charming and persistent, with Gerald's easy smile and none of Gerald's patience. About 3 years ago, he married a woman named— I'll call her what she called herself to me, because she never asked me to call her anything warmer— his wife. Her name was Renata. She had an MBA and opinions about everything and the particular confidence of someone who has never been truly uncertain about anything in her life. She was not unkind to me in the beginning, but she was always assessing. I could feel it the way you feel a cold draft before you find the gap in the weather stripping. She looked at my house, my routines, my friends, my research, and she filed it all away somewhere, calculating. Kevin started asking questions about the research about 18 months before Thanksgiving. Casual questions at first. How's the project going, Mum? Any news on the compound thing? I was glad, honestly, glad he was interested. I answered openly because he was my son and because I had always believed that the people who love you deserve your trust. Looking back, I can see exactly when the questions changed, when they stopped being casual and started being specific. Which university contacts had I spoken to? Did I have exclusivity on Vera's original notebooks, legally? Had I ever consulted a patent lawyer? I told him I hadn't. I told him I wasn't sure the research was ready for that stage. What I didn't know, what I only found out much later, was that Kevin had already made a call. The Tuesday after Renata told me not to come for Thanksgiving, I had lunch with my oldest friend. Her name is Winifred, and we have known each other since nursing school, 40 years ago. She became a nurse. I became a pharmacist. And we have eaten lunch together at least once a month for 4 decades. She's the kind of friend who doesn't say "I told you so" out loud, but whose eyes tell the whole story. Tell me everything, she said before the soup even arrived. I told her about the phone call, about Renata's pleasant voice, about standing in my kitchen with the cold toast. Winifred listened without interrupting, which is one of her great gifts. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Joanna, has Kevin asked you to sign anything recently?" I looked at her. "No. Has he mentioned a research to anyone in his professional network that you know of?" "Not that I stopped. Something surfaced, a memory I had filed away and not examined. 2 months earlier, Kevin had come for dinner, and afterward, while I was doing dishes, I had heard him on his phone in the hallway. I hadn't been able to make out the words, but I had heard a name, BioNorth. It was a mid-sized pharmaceutical development company based in Toronto. I knew it distantly from industry news. "Winifred," I said slowly, "what are you not telling me?" She had her hands folded on the table. She looked at me with the steady, kind directness that had gotten me through Gerald's funeral and my mother's decline and every hard thing in the last 40 years. "My nephew works in IP law," she said. "He mentioned just in passing last week that someone had approached BioNorth recently about a natural compound portfolio with Cape Breton provenance. He didn't know specifics. He mentioned it because he knows about your work." She paused. "He said the person who approached them identified themselves as the primary developer." The room felt very still. "Kevin," I said. Winifred didn't answer. She didn't need to. I drove home from that lunch in a state I can only describe as a very cold clarity. Not anger, not yet. Something quieter and more absolute than anger. The feeling you get when something you suspected but refused to fully believe finally steps out of the shadows into the light and you see exactly what it is. I went to my filing cabinet. I checked every document, every dated entry, every signed witness notation. I had asked Winifred herself to countersign 6 of my trial records at the time, a professional habit I had kept from my pharmacy years. Everything was in order. Everything was mine. Then I called a patent lawyer. Her name was Dominique, and she had been recommended to me by my old University of Waterloo contact. She was based in Ottawa, and she agreed to see me that Friday. I drove the 40 minutes with my filing cabinet documents in a locked case on the passenger seat, next to Vera's notebooks in a canvas bag. Dominique spent 2 hours with me. She asked precise questions. She reviewed my documentation with the focused silence of someone who knows exactly what she is looking at. At the end, she leaned back in her chair and told me, in the plainest language possible, that I had a strong and documentable case for intellectual property protection, that the original notebooks, combined with my own documented refinements, constituted a clear provenance trail, that I should file immediately. "Is there any reason you haven't already?" she asked. I thought about Kevin's voice asking me how the project was going. His hand on my shoulder at Gerald's graveside 4 years ago. The little boy who had fallen asleep on my lap at every long car trip, all the way until he was embarrassingly old for that sort of thing. I kept hoping I was wrong, I said. Dominic nodded like she had heard this before. "File now," she said gently, "before anything moves further." I filed that afternoon from her office. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. I spent those 3 weeks doing something I had not done in years. I did nothing except what mattered. I walked every morning. I called my granddaughter, Kevin's daughter from a brief earlier relationship, 8 years old, who lived with her mother in Kingston and who I had always stayed close to despite Renata's polite efforts to complicate those visits. I called my sister in British Columbia. I read. I cooked soup and ate it at my own kitchen table and did not pretend to anyone, including myself, that I was fine with what my son had done. Because I wasn't fine. I want to be honest about that. There is a particular grief in this kind of betrayal. It is not like losing someone to death, where the love closes over the wound eventually, the way water closes over a stone. It is more like discovering that a room you thought you knew perfectly has a wall in the wrong place. The house doesn't fall down, but it's never quite the same room again. I did not call Kevin. I did not tell him what I knew or what I had done. Thanksgiving fell on the second Monday of October, as it does in Canada. The day before, I drove to Kingston and took my granddaughter to the agricultural fair that runs every year just outside the city. We ate maple taffy and she won a small stuffed moose at a ring toss game, and she held my hand in the parking lot without me asking, the way children do when they sense something is worth holding on to. She asked me why I wasn't going to Daddy's for Thanksgiving. I told her that Daddy's house was going to be full this year and that I was going to have my own Thanksgiving. She looked at me for a moment with 8-year-old seriousness. "That doesn't sound fair," she said. "Maybe not," I said. "But sometimes things happen that aren't fair, and the best thing you can do is not let them take away your whole day." She thought about this. Then she said she wanted more taffy. I bought her more taffy. We drove back to Kingston with the stuffed moose on the dashboard and the radio playing something from the 70s that neither of us knew, but we both sang along anyway. On Thanksgiving evening, I cooked a small chicken and made stuffing and opened a bottle of the Ontario Pinot Noir that Gerald and I had always saved for occasions. I sat at my own table and gave thanks for the things that were still whole. Winifred, my granddaughter, the birch trees finally bare and resting in the yard, the filing cabinet with its ordered documents, the cedar chest with Vera's notebooks, the work that was mine. Clearly and completely and finally mine. The phone rang at 8:43 in the evening. It was Kevin. His voice was strange, tightly controlled in the way that voices get when someone is working very hard not to sound the way they actually feel. "Mom," he said, "I got a call today from BioNorth." I was quiet. I let the silence be his to fill. They said someone had filed a patent claim on the compound portfolio we had discussed. He paused, with full provenance documentation back to Grandma Vera's notebooks. Another pause. They said the filing predates my introduction by 3 weeks. The window above my kitchen sink was dark, and I could see my own reflection in it. A 63-year-old woman in a cardigan, holding a phone with a half-eaten Thanksgiving dinner on the table behind her. "Yes," I said. A long silence. "You knew," he said. Not an accusation, not quite. More like someone reading a sentence they had hoped would say something different. "I found out," I said, "and then I did what needed to be done." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Then I was going to include you. I was going to bring you in properly once the deal was Kevin." My voice was quiet. "I know what you were going to do. And you know that I know." The silence that followed was the longest of the conversation. I could hear him breathing. "I'm sorry," he said finally. His voice, for the first time in the call, sounded like my son, like the person who used to fall asleep on my lap in the car. "I know you are," I said, "but I'm sorry too, because this is going to change things and I didn't want it to." I didn't slam the phone down. I didn't make a speech. I didn't tell him what I thought of Renata, or list his failures, or demand an explanation. I simply said that we would need some time and that I hoped he understood why. Then I hung up. What happened afterward I will summarize simply because the details are still in process and because some things are better kept close. Dominic secured the patent filing. BioNorth, once they understood the complete provenance picture, entered into preliminary licensing discussions with me, not with Kevin. There is a clinical pharmacology team at a university research hospital in Hamilton that is now conducting the kind of formal trials that my informal work could never substitute for. Whether the compound proves out at clinical scale, I genuinely don't know. But it is being tested properly by people who know how to test it, and whatever results come from that testing will be built on a foundation that Vera started and I continued, and that no one, not even the son I love, can undo. Kevin and I have spoken 3 times since Thanksgiving. The conversations are careful. We're like two people who know each other very well, trying to relearn how to be in the same room without triggering the thing that happened. I don't know if we'll get there. I think we might. He is still my son, and I am still his mother, and those are facts that exist below the level of what he did. But I will tell you what I know, and what I want every woman in a situation like mine to hear. Your work is yours. Your ideas are yours. Your research, your expertise, the decades of quiet effort you poured into something because you believed in it. Those things belong to you, and you are allowed to protect them, even when protecting them means protecting them from someone you love. Kindness is not the same as trust. Trust is something you build over time in both directions, and when someone removes the bricks from one side, the wall comes down regardless of how much you love them. Winifred came for lunch the week after Thanksgiving, and I told her everything. She listened the same way she always has, hands folded, soup getting slightly cold. When I finished, she said Vera would have approved. I laughed, and I thought about that small woman in Cape Breton with her notebooks and her certainty, filling in her careful handwriting for 50 years, trusting that the right person would eventually open the chest. I think I finally understand why she left it to me. I keep thinking about that Tuesday morning in November, the cold toast, the pleasant voice on the phone, the way I said of course when what I meant was something else entirely. There is a cause and an effect to everything that happened, and I've spent enough time now sitting with it that I can trace the whole line clearly. Kevin didn't become someone who would do what he did overnight. It happened slowly, in small choices to take rather than build, to assume rather than ask, to treat my work as something adjacent to him rather than something entirely my own. And I made choices too. I chose to answer his questions openly when something in me was already uneasy. I chose to give trust where trust hadn't quite been earned. Not because I was foolish, because I was his mother, and mothers carry a particular kind of hope that is sometimes the last thing to surrender. But here is what I know now. The work survived because of something Vera understood long before I did, that what you build with integrity holds. She spent 50 years filling those notebooks, not because anyone asked her to, not because there was a deal waiting at the end, but because she believed the work mattered and she had the honesty to do it carefully. That is a kind of moral seriousness I am still learning from. Doing the right thing even when no one is watching, documenting the truth, even when you aren't sure it will ever matter to anyone but you. And the knowledge, the actual intelligence I brought to her work, that didn't come from nowhere either. 30 years of pharmacy, 2 years of research I conducted not for money but because I genuinely needed to understand something. When Dominic looked at my documentation and said I had a strong case, she wasn't being kind. She was reading the record of someone who had taken their expertise seriously. Knowledge protects you in ways you can't always anticipate. I couldn't have known, sitting in my spare room reading Vera's notebooks at 2 a.m, that one day those careful records would be the thing standing between me and losing everything. What got me into Dominic's office, though, what made me pick up the phone at all, was something quieter than either of those things. It was just the refusal to give up. Winifred asked me the right question over soup, and instead of explaining it away, I followed it. I drove to Ottawa with a locked case on my passenger seat. I sat across from a lawyer I had never met and told her the whole story. That took something. I won't pretend it was easy or that I wasn't afraid of what confirming my suspicions would mean. Kevin and I are still finding our way back to each other, slowly and carefully, the way you navigate a room after the furniture's been moved. I don't know yet what will become, but I know who I am. I know what I built, and why, and for whom. Vera left those notebooks to Gerald, and Gerald left them to me. I think she trusted that eventually the right person would open the chest and take the work seriously. I intend to be worthy of that trust, even now, especially now.